let's assume that I make an additional amount, let's say 110,000, right? Because I've done this thing and it's going to be slowly, and then I'm going to potential to go up even larger. If all of a sudden I come out of the that cycle and it's now 3 years, in theory, that's $300,000 that I've lost potential earnings, whether I go to grad school or not. And so for a 2-year versus 3-year, that difference is $100,000 of additional negative income that I need to calculate in, right? So
all right, well, I'll definitely bring that up because I want to ask you about your finances, about the whole financial thinking.
yeah,
I mean, so I started the live stream. So what I'll do is I want to introduce you, if that's cool.
that'd be great.
So Stephen basically is somebody that I came into contact with through Y Combinator's Hacker News forums. And I was doing some research for Eazl's Careers in Programming course. And basically, I liked the way that you were so level-headed about your career change into UI, UX. You went back to school and got a different degree to do it. How old were you when you started to make the career change, Stephen?
35, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. And so I just know that we have a lot of people in the community, maybe people watching, that are in this situation. I mean, the demand for tech jobs is huge. It's expected to grow. And there are a lot of people who are looking at, okay, like how do I get into that? So Stephen currently works at FM Global, which is an insurance company. You said you're head of user experience. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm a director of user experience. We have a team of we're a growing team. We're getting into maybe around 20 designers, hopefully by the end of the year. We're currently, I think, 16.
Well, so I just want to say thank you so much for your time on behalf of everybody in the Eazl community, because I know that you're a busy person.
Great.
And so I guess my first question for you, Stephen, was really about, what caused the career change. Can you give us some insights into your thinking when you were kind of debating maybe your different alternatives and what your thinking was like before you really started the process?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess if I was to roll back the hands of time a bit, a little bit over 20 years ago, I did my undergraduate degree at University of Vermont. So I think, like most kids, coming out of high school, you really have no clue as to who you want to be when you grow up, and where you want to study. And at least for myself, state schools versus private schools felt like a viable path. I was an out-of-stater, so I was paying a little bit higher, but still relatively less than some of my friends who were going to more private schools. And this would have been the early 90s, around 92 I went. And I think that's important to keep in mind because there's been a significant radical change in undergraduate since mid-90s. I think it was around 95 or so that the arms race, it feels like, for college tuitions just hit nuclear. And it became, at the time that I was in school, $18,000 was around what you would pay for a degree,
For the entire degree.
For the entire, yes, $18,000 per year.
It's like a semester now.
right. So 18,000 per year, right? So, but then that turned into a semester, and then that turned into, that's how much you pay for books, right? So, I mean, we've really kind of shifted the equation. So when I say that I have a 4-year degree, I think you also have to keep in mind the time of history that I got that 4-year degree.
And what did you study originally?
So I studied political science and history with a Canadian studies minor. So yeah, I think it's a typical story. You go in there, you don't really know what you want. I knew I liked political science, and I was fascinated by social contract theory, so Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, and kept taking these classes. And after a while, you meet with your advisor, and the guy who I met with was like, "You're going down a weird path, right? Yes, you're doing your political science, but you're also doing enough for history," because I was kind of shifting between the two. And he said, at this point, rather than having a history minor, you're one class away from having a double major, but you have no real good minor, in line here. And so Canadian studies kind of filled in a gap. Don't ask me why, don't ask me how. But all of this is to say that when I went through that whole pathway, I knew that I was going to work in computers. So I knew that everything that I was going to do in my undergraduate was more for personal fulfillment, to give me an idea around, in my mind, it was social contract theory. I really was curious to understand why we follow the laws that
How
we do.
society works, what motivates people.
Exactly. I grew up. I grew up in northern New Jersey, New York, southern New York area, Rockland County, and when watching The Sopranos was kind of unironic to me, because I had a number of friends whose parents were in the mob and whose parents actually went to jail and did all this stuff. And it was really funny because you're going to high school with them. You're socializing with them in a very normal ways, yet their parents are going to jail for these very serious things. But like The Sopranos, it's a suburban lifestyle, right? They're not these thugs that are roaming the streets with baseball bats. They're driving Escalades and sending their kids to private schools and doing all that stuff. So for me, it was kind of wrapping my head around why are the Joy Tucci's of the world, like, why does her dad have to go to jail, but my dad doesn't? And how different are our families and all of that. So
how do you think
to me,
that shaped your like career thinking at all? Like, do you think that had an impact?
I think what it speaks to is, you really have to go with what things that start to inspire you and drive you to think and learn, right? Very vague, very kind of broad statements, but kind of go with your passions, I guess, is what it comes down to, right? When you're 18 years old, you really don't have much to go by, so you might as well go by a passion. And if there's a bit of a spark, and for me, it was like, well, if I understand why we follow the laws that we do, maybe that will lead me towards understanding the career options that'll be available for me, right? I knew that I didn't want to go break the law, and I want to go down a more hard-earning path. But can I at least understand, when we say the law, like, what does that mean? So in some cases, it was maybe a groundwork for legal, right? If I want to maybe become a lawyer later in life, political science seems to be a good foundation for that.
Mm-hmm. So as a young person, you're thinking like, okay, I'm curious about this, and so I'm just going to follow this curiosity because I assume that eventually it'll kind of unfold into some type of career path.
Something, and I also knew in the back of my head, I love computers. I was really, really good at them. I had a number of friends who just were part of the phone phreaking community. So it's kind of like a hacking, but you roll back the hands of time to 1980s. Most people didn't have computers, but everyone had a phone in their house. And there were ways that you could pick up that phone, dial special codes using the touch tones.
Like Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Great, wonderful things would happen. And so we would do this a lot, my friends and I, and using that to dial modem, to get to chat rooms and all that. So knowing that I had that in my back pocket, that was my true passion. After I graduated school, I moved to Boston and was running a computer lab for Simmons College, which is an all-women's college. And really just, they had great internet access, and I could just kind of install Windows 95 using floppy disks to computers in their lab, and a very chilled, relaxed environment. I got tired of Boston winters and moved out to Los Angeles with some friends. And by doing that, we were kind of just chasing a bit of the early internet dream. This would have been the late 90s at this point, 97, 98. And I ended up working for a software company called Final Draft. It's a screenwriting software company. So if you write a screenplay, you would use their application. And I was working their technical support side. So I was answering the phones and kind of really in the early days, that was user experience, because I was helping to write the manual. I was the front line hearing the user as the things that worked and didn't work in the application. And then I would have daily meetings with the programmers to say, hey, we got to fix this, right? So here's a bug, and then documenting it and coming around it and thinking about new ways of enhancing the application through features to satisfy the user needs. So it really wasn't called UX at that time. There were people in large companies that were doing usability or human factors, but really this was just down and dirty. Hey, I'm answering phones, cataloging bugs, and working with development to fix those bugs.
But that's interesting that you can relate your work now, the change that you have made, to something that something that was before. It shows that you're you carry some momentum from what you were doing before you decided to recommit and get a fresh education and make these changes, and that we're going to talk about here in a minute. Like, you have a connection to that. You didn't just say, oh my God, I'm just going to take a whole radical 180-degree turn in the opposite direction.
I guess the probably the best advice, and my father, he owns his own business, and that actually comes to play in a little bit because I ended up going back to work with him in New York. But he always kind of taught me to just to know your surroundings, right? And to be just aware of where you are physically in space, right? So where are the exits? Where where is your proximal area? But also, I think kind of more emotionally and philosophically, where are you in this world? Kind of where are you moving towards? Where are you kind of heading? And in order to I guess growing up with that notion of space, time and space, it really made it a lot easier for me to say, hey, I'm here right now and I'm comfortable and I want to move over there. And I think I'll be more comfortable over there. And if I'm not comfortable, I know that I can go back to where I was or maybe go to a different place. It's the difference between, being in a dark room, right? And there's people who just kind of feel like they can see in the dark and they know where the doors are and they kind of intuitively have laid out this mental map of it. And then there's people who fumble around and bump into furniture and just, they feel paralyzed and they can't go anywhere. And I just felt like I always had the knack for being able to see in the dark and being able to get to know where I need to get to and getting over there and not feel awkward if I do step on or bump into some furniture. It just gave me another data point as to where things are in the room.
So just to reflect back to you, what I'm hearing from you is part of your thinking before you made this big career change was that you realized from your father that you need to manage your surroundings in order to inspire change.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I'm hearing from you that you were comfortable making some mistakes and you realized that you were going to maybe, I don't know, look kind of foolish at points along the journey, and that's just part of it.
I still look foolish. I think it's part of it is we're human, and understanding that, and that's why I love user experience, because it embraces that empathy side so much. And if I'm not making mistakes, and most importantly learning from those mistakes, then I'm not living, right? And just to kind of finish rounding out the story of that career thing. So imagine I'm in Los Angeles. It is 2000 at this point. So turn of the century, Y2K, everyone was afraid the planes were going to fall out of the sky. And so tech was really starting to emerge, all of these, startups, Mozilla, that, Netscape, they're starting to come alive, pets.com, any concept you can possibly think of was possible, with a clever domain name. And, so a lot of people, when you think back to that time, it's easy to say, oh, well, rationality came into the marketplace and that's what burst the bubble. But there was a number of factors. And one of them that kind of also gets, that I experienced firsthand, that now I think over time, I think really did have a significant play, was the involvement of Enron and how they were manipulating the energy market in Southern California. So I'll set the scene. I was living in a loft in downtown LA, and over on Factory Place, for those who might be familiar with it. So Little Tokyo, Alameda and 6th is the area. And that whole area is known for its fashion manufacturing. At least at the time, it was a major hub. American Apparel had just started in a small factory down there, and actually was working with them and some of the other clients. And my job was to help people set up their computer systems. So I was setting up DSL, T1 lines, these kind of antiquated notions of just being able to get people online. So they would need a router. They would need doing backups on their machines. There was no notion of cloud storage really at that point. So people had to do tape backups, and if you're a business, you really had to kind of make sure that you had your stuff together, because if something were to happen, you go out quickly. And so I was kind of the roving IT guy. I would go to, work with one client, get a good reputation, go to the other. And things are going well. And it
And
was
now, were you working for yourself? Were you
working for myself. Yeah,
okay?
I left the software company. I did it for a couple of years and just said, hey, this is great. I can make actually more money, doing private client stuff. And so as I was doing that, the curious thing happened where basically Enron was manipulating the market, and that manipulation really didn't come into full effect until the summertime of that year. And so, imagine July of that year. One of my clients was a dyer, and that's a fancy way of saying they have washers and dryers, and they dye denim, right? So stonewashed jeans, right? Uh, Dated with the fashion, right? But if you want to buy a pair of stonewashed jeans, you have someone who's got a bunch of denim, and they throw this fabric into a machine, literally with rocks, right? And it tumbles and it washes it, stone washes it, and then they dry it, and then that output is stonewash, right? Denim. And so this gentleman had a facility in LA that big old washers and dryers, and his fixed energy cost was on average around $10,000 a month, right? So it's been like that for years. Maybe it goes up to 12,000 when he's getting a lot more work in. Maybe it dips down to 8,000, when he's a little light on work. But let's say it averages out at 10,000. So in July of that year, PG&E, the power company, reached out to him and said, "Hey, your bill is going to be higher this month. We don't know how much it's going up, but let's just say it's not going to be 10,000." So when he finally got his July bill, it was $100,000.
Wow.
So this guy was like, "Whoa!" Right? And so, and I was working with him and watching this unfold, and he's like, "Man, I just had to kind of lay off my workforce. I'm really nervous." We now go into August, and by the end of August, well, during that whole month, so we had rolling blackouts. If you remember the term, everyone's talking about the rolling blackouts. They actually weren't blackouts; they were brownouts. And from a technical point of view, that's very important because that means that they throttle down the power, so your lights kind of dim. If you have a computer system, you fry that system. So I was getting tons of business. Hey, my machine doesn't work anymore. I can't get online. Well, yeah, the router got fried because they throttled the power down before it actually went to a blackout, and that just burned your thing out. So I kept getting these calls and showing up. And so I show up to the guy in August, and he was out of business. His bill came in, it was $200,000 for that month, for August. So instantly he went from $10,000 to $300,000 worth of energy bills unplanned, completely out of business. Mm-hmm. And I was watching it systematically. All my clients were just losing their shirt. They, truly could not do this anymore. And so it seemed like a pretty dire place to get out of. My wife and I said, "Hey, let's move back to New York. I work with my dad. He's a private investigator, and that's kind of the family business. And so let's go back there." So spring of 2001, we moved back to Brooklyn, New York, because nothing bad could ever happen in New York City in 2001. So it seemed like a safe harbor for us. So we moved there. And that was one big career transition, is moving away from tech into a family business. They felt like it was much more of a stable kind of way to just move away from the dynamics that you really can't control.
Yeah, so that's why you left LA, was really because I guess you felt like as a freelancer basically, and the economy taking these massive shocks of spikes in energy prices, that you were feeling like it was just too unstable for you. I mean, were you having financial problems?
No, actually, I mean, my wife and I, we're good spot. I mean, just the two of us, and very much happy. But again, it's this notion of, well, hey, the grass seems a lot greener in New York. There's a lot less of this frothiness like we're finding in California with the .com stuff. And I think that's also where this mentality of the East Coast, West Coast mentality comes in. The East Coast tends to be much more staid and, traditional, and, doesn't mess with all that craziness that California does. It did feel like a solid, alternative. Sure, New York definitely had its Cosmo.coms and all of these other, things that people are doing out there that eventually imploded. But I would say also, I mean, not to trivialize by any means, but September 11 rolled around, so I had moved there Memorial Day, so May of 2001. and then had a beautiful summer. Then by September, all the rules changed again. And to me, at least, it represented that, look, now this uncertainty is hitting businesses that pride themselves on certainty, insurance being number one. I mean, Cantor Fitzgerald and all the financial and insurance companies were just brought to their knees after that event. And in some cases are still trying to learn and recover from it.
So basically, your move was then to say, I'm going to go into a small business that has almost nothing to do related to technology.
Right. Well, yes. I mean, I think everything does. I mean, one of the value adds was, hey, Pop, I'll work with you, but I'm going to help you to modernize your system, right? I'll make it so that we can automate some of the things that just feel very old school manual, right?
And your dad's a private investigator, right?
He is. Yeah. My grandfather started the business in the 70s, right? So, I grew up in this Banachek sort of world, and I make a Banachek reference I'll touch on in a second, but basically this notion of these fancy insurance investigators, right? So we're working a lot of these insurance claims for the insurance companies. You forget that finding people used to be a very laborious process of knocking on doors and looking at old phone books from 10 years prior to see their name listed there before they made it an unlisted number. Now we're at in an age where databases are online, and right when I came in there, those databases were starting to really come to life. And so one of our biggest absolute profit centers was just being able to go online and enter in people's names and find out where they were living, and then reach out to them that way. It's called skip tracing. We were finding people left and right, and the insurance company was very slow to that. And we were able to just basically Google them, right? Because Google was just starting to kind of come into being then. And these older agencies didn't know what Google was, and so it was amazing. You're able to kind of play off that their lack of knowledge and sophistication on modern tools in order to get a financial advantage.
But it sounds to me like so you're in this small business, and you ultimately decide to leave it, and you have this background in like networking and things like that. So what made you think that you needed to go, for example, get another degree as a part of the transition after you leave the private investigator firm with your dad?
I clearly remember one morning I got a phone call around 8 o'clock, and there was a witness that was due to testify in a murder trial. This was a wrongful death.
That's so much intrigue, Stephen. Your story is like full of like lobsters.
I'm trying. Yeah, just living my life. Every time I feel like I'm out, they bring me right back in, right? So we were defending the city of New Rochelle, which is a city just outside of New York City in Westchester County. We're defending their police department, and there was a case involving chasing a suspect, and the suspect decided that he was going to scale out the window of an apartment using the cable line. There was cable wires coming in, and the wire broke. He fell and he died.
Oh my God. Okay.
So, all right. So someone dies, and again, the circumstances around it, but the family brought in action against the city, saying, hey, wrongful death, right? That the police chased him out the window. I'm not going to add any, value judgment to it. My only role is, hey, look, we're defending the police department, and there's a witness in Brooklyn that you need to speak to find out what they know about this, because we're about to go to trial on. We're about to actually pick a jury on it. So the judge, they had disclosed this witness just prior to it. So nothing improper about it, right? Part of the procedure is you have to disclose your witness list. But the goal, of course, is the moment you get that list, you got to be really quick and find out what they know before the lawyer calls up the witness and says, hey, don't talk to anyone. So, all right, I'll head over there. So it was a rough part of Brooklyn. I dropped my wife off to work, and she was laughing, because she knew that I was just being kind of stone-faced, and I put my steel-toed boots on, and I, kind of layer up this outfit, and I start to talk in a very rough, like New Yorkese, accent, and just being very, very kind of short with her. And she knew something was up, but she just, wasn't going to get it out of me at that moment. And then I get to the apartment building, and you can't ring the doorbell for the person you're going to talk to if you're going to surprise them, right? So you got to wait to get buzzed in. So I'm hanging out, go up the into the apartment. He's on the third floor, boom, 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 kind of, walk up the stairs. My heart's kind of pounding out of my chest. I don't know who this guy is, right? So I knock on the door, in a nice forceful bump, bump, bump. And this guy answers the door. And I swear to God, it looks no different than you. And I'm like, you were, and I identify, hey, are you Jack? Yeah, yeah. Okay, you were a witness to a murder in New Rochelle? He goes, no, I'm a computer guy. I did the animation to show that the trajectory of, when the cops entered the room and how, there was a fight that ensued and all of that. So no, I just did the computer 3D animation to lay out the room. So he was a witness that was going to testify, but more towards the animation. He wasn't an eyewitness. And of course, I said, okay, thank you very much, and left. And, finally catch some fresh air. And in that exact moment, I was like, that went wonderfully well, but it could have gone horribly wrong.
Right? If it would have been somebody dangerous or whatever.
Yeah. I never carried a gun. I refused to do that. It's the best advice I ever got from a cop was, you carry a gun, you have to use it to kill someone. So if you're not prepared to do that, don't carry, because they'll kill you, right? There's no sense even bringing that into the equation if you're not prepared to use it. I don't know about you, but I don't really feel comfortable doing that. So I didn't do it. And later on, talked to my wife, and she was like, you're too young for this. Right. At the time I was, mid 30s, almost like 32, 33 or so. She's like, you're just too young for this. You're working with a bunch of retired cops in their 50s and 60s. And, and this is a situation where, if you're in a career that is just, you're the wrong demographic on the other side. Right. I mean, most of my whole cohorts were in their 50s and 60s. And they were at that later stage where they've already done a life and a career. And so this becomes, something happens. To me, I had a future ahead of me. I had a wife, potentially kids, all that. And so that just kind of triggered. I said, you know what? I love the creative arts. I just need to move out of that, right? Go back to your instincts of I don't want to put myself into these dangerous situations where I'm knocking on doors in tenement houses in Brooklyn to see if you're a witness to a murder. Like, I don't need that in my life.
So let's talk about your financial thinking, because at this point, I mean, I can just imagine what would happen if I had to go and retool for a couple of years. It would be scary from a financial standpoint. I mean, how were you feeling about all that? What was your thinking about the financial aspect of making a big career change?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everything else. I mean, so I had a desire to leave, but then there's also this notion of a financial. When you're in a family business, the analogy I use is like, my dad and I were just two horses drinking from the same stream. And when that water starts to dry up a little, there was enough water for one horse. We knew that. And so he still does it. And he actually makes great living on it. But I kept telling him, I was like, there's not enough. And if anything, if I don't leave now, I'm actually jeopardizing any sort of cushion that I might have with, go back home to the parents. Because he and I were both doing it. If the business went under, I can't help him. He can't help me. So I think part of the calculation is, you got to think just full picture. What are your backstops? Who are the people in your life that you feel like you can rely on, and are they in a good spot? And so in my case, decisions I was making potentially were jeopardizing that backstop.
Interesting. So part of your financial thinking was to think, okay, how can my family, my network, if I needed to, whatever,
move
live
back
rent
home,
free for a few months, like, are there people in a place to support that?
Yeah. And that's, so it's something unique to people who have family businesses. I've talked to other friends who are in similar situations. It's really hard to tell your boss no when that boss is your father, and in many cases, I mean, the joke with my dad and I, we sat in a car for 8 hours on a surveillance, and 6 hours into it, I told him, man, there's nothing I have to say to you anymore. I mean, I love you, but I have nothing. Any opportunity to, tell your dad, I've had it. I've talked to him about everything in the world, right? And then you hit that point where you're like, when you're working with family like that, you got to decide, is it better to maintain those relationships for the family reunions and all that social stuff? Is it better to maintain that or pursue a financial goal? Because you're also potentially stepping over family in order to achieve that financial, to kind of work your way up, and that's also not a great spot. So I think when you're doing these calculations, I mean, there's a financial for sure, but there's also a social emotional element to it as well.
Yeah, and how about your wife? Was she, was she ready to take the financial hit with you?
So we did what we call the high five, where she went back to grad school for occupational therapy, and so I supported her while she was doing her program, and she graduated her program, and then I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to go into a program myself. So really, really fortunate to have a partner that kind of had my back, and we kind of just say it as like it's a high five slash, I get up to a ledge, I pull her up, she gets up, she pulls me up. So we've been doing that laddering, we've been together for over 20 years now.
And then, so when you did, so you went to Rhode Island School of Design,
Mhm.
for your to help you make the change. So did you go into debt for that degree, or were you able to pay for it?
I was really fortunate. My wife went into severe debt. She went to NYU for her program, and I watched that train wreck unfold. So that would have been 2005 that she kind of was going through all of that, and that's when we realized that, or I realized, and we both did, that the notion of higher education had just completely changed from when we had our undergrad experience. Paying basically $1,000 per credit at NYU. I believe the total number of debt we accrued on that was about 120,000. Yeah, right. I mean, so the joke was that she bought the house that we never lived in, and I bought the SUV that we never lived in. My total student loan burden by the time I did my 2-year program was 57,000.
Mm.
So, to me, obviously 57,000 versus, 120,000, it's much more manageable, but still, I mean,
It's a lot of money.
it's a lot of money. I proudly paid it off, but, I was in a good, fortunate situation to be able to pay that down by doing work. I worked a number of good cases, just prior to getting into school. And even while I was in school, I was fortunate to be able to do some side work, to keep that number low. I had classmates whose debt load was in the 100,000 range, and that was a 2-year program. And you and I started talking a little bit about this. So one of the calculations that we came that I factored when looking at going back to school was, I only wanted to do a 2-year program, and the reason being is, there's this concept known as negative income, which when I first heard it, I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Either you make money or you don't. Well, school enters this funny area of negative income where, the length of the program, the longer it is, the more negative income you're generating. So the math you can use is, if you're making $100,000 and you have a choice between entering a 2-year or a 3-year program, and let's assume that coming out of that program, you're going to maintain, if you're lucky, you're not doing a full retool, you're going to maintain that $100,000, maybe get a little bit more, but you're doing the program because you know that eventually it's going to keep going up higher, right? The 100,000 was your barrier. You do this program, and it's going to break you through so you can get $150,000, $200,000 going forward. So if it's a 2-year program, you're out of the workforce for 2 years. That's negative income of $200,000. If it's a 3-year, that's 300,000 negative income. So, I mean, just do the math on that. If you do the 2-year program, great, you can get back to making your 100 grand again, and start paying down that student loan debt, in addition to the fact that you have 200,000 less coming into you. And so I think that's the hard part, is when people don't factor that negative income hit, they just think, oh, well, hey, I want to go into a program that's 5 years long, right?
So
Be in
speed is
shelter.
important to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think the opposite. You want a program that's as short as possible, so you can either keep working, which would be the ideal, maybe throttle it down to 60%, or if you have to go down to 100% in school, then make it so it's as short as possible so you can get back to earning money.
Now, were you doing any like projects or anything related to what you were going to be doing after school while you were in school? Or were you just thinking like, okay, this is my time to study?
Yeah, I mean, I think A bit of both. I mean, Rizzi is a very much a hands-on school, and it's a extremely unique type of art school. So it wasn't theory-based. It's grounded in the craft, and so I was spending time in the wood shops and blowing glass and metal and just doing very much manual labor. And I knew it was access to studio time that I wouldn't be able to get afterwards. So I took full advantage of the studio work. In terms of working on projects outside of the studio, I tried to find the right balance. I looked at it as, hey, this is 2 years, enjoy it, right? Don't go too crazy. You're not going to go too crazy on expenses, but at the same time, just enjoy your time. Get to know your classmates. In the world of art and design, the people you make then, I'm still friends with all of them. It's a very small program. There's only 10 people in the program, my class. Still very close with them, and I've kept in touch and used them as resources in helping to staff for projects and just do all kinds of things. So
yeah, that's one thing I noticed from your original post that drew me to you, is that you said that the network was important, and it was important to be friendly with people as you're building, as you are retooling, because these people can become important and helpful.
My first job out of school, when I left Rizzi, I moved out to the Bay Area, 2010. And for those who are familiar with the design economy around that time, 2009, 2010, I mean, it was in the absolute toilet. There was no work. All the agency work was drying up. I was working at a company. I finally got a job at a company called Smart Design. Smart Design is a studio that makes the OXO products that we're all familiar with. And they have offices worldwide, but at the time, the bulk of it is in their New York office, and then they had a San Francisco office, and they ended up, in the past 8 years, they ended up shuttering that office. But my brief 6 months there, I met an amazing group of people that kind of carried me through my entire working relationship in the Bay Area.
So your first role in the Bay Area was the OXO work, or the work for this smart design company, was it tech related, or was it totally unrelated to tech?
I quite honestly, I needed a job. So I took a job in their marketing group because that was what was hiring. I said, all right, I'll take it. And, they took a shot on me, because if you think about it, I did this wonderful program at Rizzi, which has got a great, street cred. But at the same time, I'm a private investigator who, has kind of done a whole number of things. So there's nothing really tangible about my prior work history until you go way back to the software stuff I was doing. And so I had to really be extremely strategic about the projects that I worked with, the people I associated with, because I knew that I had to tell a story, right? It had to become a narrative.
That's what I'm thinking too, because now it's like your resume looks like, okay, private investigator, school, physical product marketer. Yeah, that's not exactly what would lead up to UX, basically.
There's people in this world who you just kind of look at and you envy, and you go like, wow, you really just you were at one job for 5 years, and then you were at another job for 7 years, and they kept getting these great promotions and movements there. I look at that enviously and saying, that's great. You didn't have to really struggle too much, right? You just kind of did some good work and people liked you. And not everyone has that path. I mean, I forget that. So if I was in the Bay Area for 8 years, I think I had 10 jobs. Right.
Wow. So how did you do that on your resume? Because I think a lot of people that are, watching or going to watch this video would have the experience of, when you're trying to retool and relaunch a career, oftentimes you gotta take what work you can get. You got to do projects on the side. And the only thing that can be tricky with that is that then your resume, your narrative becomes really complicated. And when you go to somebody, and you say, hey, I want a job, a full-time job, they say, okay, cool, let me see your resume. And, it looks really cluttered, and there's, yeah, what's going on here?
Yeah. And so one of my best advice to that is, if you have to do the laddering, and it's called laddering, where you basically, you take one job with the notion that, hey, I'm on one rung, I need to keep moving up, knowing that you could move down, but your ultimate goal is going to be up. I would say you're going to have to choose between um, income or price, right? How much they're willing to pay, and name. And for me, I found name recognition will trump price any day.
So
And
you
that
were
means,
willing to work on the projects that would give you, that would associate you with higher profile organizations, basically.
so every company that I worked with, I needed to make sure that it can pass like the mom test of, does mom know what that company's called, right? So I worked for Cisco, for Kaiser Permanente, GE. I worked for one design agency that was small called Design Map, which I actually loved. Loved the people, loved everything about it. But I was scared about it because they didn't have the name recognition, and they were very boutique in the enterprise UX world. Had a solid reputation, but again, it kind of scared me a little bit because people wouldn't know that, and I would have. If you're doing that laddering, you need to make sure that it's brand names, household names, because you're basically leveraging that reputation. So I hated my 6 months at Cisco, but everyone knows Cisco, right? And I knew I wouldn't have to explain myself that, oh, he worked at Cisco. And people will assume all of the different projects and products that Cisco supports. And even though the actual work stream that I was on was ridiculous, and it felt like I was in a rubber room, I wasn't doing anything, but I was able to capture the larger, Cisco halo.
Well, and I just feel this like repeated pattern of the low ego, because I know that you took an internship that paid you $15 an hour at one point.
Yeah, Smart Design. It was $15 an hour. I mean, I was a marketing intern. The joke was
that was Smart Design. Okay, so that's your first job after Rizzi, and it was like an internship.
Total intern. No, it wasn't like it was. I mean, and it was a 6-month contract, and because the economy was so bad, the design economy, I had to leave it in 5 months, because I had to leave a month early because they had no work. I felt bad for them, right? Because they were paying me basically to show up and do all this stuff. And I was like, you have nothing for me to do. I'm just going to leave here. And then I left. My wife, after my going away party, I woke up a little hungover that morning. She says, I'm pregnant. So we got a kid coming on the way. I said, oh, this is awesome, right? So that was in June. I hustled a bit, and then got a job at Kaiser Permanente, a big healthcare organization out there. And, sat on that job for a year and a half.
Now, were these jobs, like, for example, that job at Kaiser Permanente, did you find that job through a network or from somebody you'd met in the Bay Area, or did you just apply online?
It was, actually applied online, went straight through the portal. I was trying to work my connections, and, that was a tough one. That wasn't a good fit. And this is when I think you also have to realize you can't just take any old job, in that case, it was an innovation group, and I found that innovation is a lot of talk and no real making. And I was, as a maker, self-professed maker, it just kind of rubbed me a little wrong. But probably more important, innovation is all about evangelizing this big process, and hey, we can achieve these results. And without actually doing it yourself, you're just saying words, right? And I wasn't being authentic and truthful. And that, to me, was probably a real big wake-up call to saying, hey, look, if you want to go down these paths, you really have to be making some stuff. You really have to have a solid, true, tangible portfolio, a body of work. Because
you're not because you're not, you can't, because you're making a midlife career change, basically, you can't say, look, I've been doing UX for 20 years, or I've been, a whatever, like a back-end developer for 20 years. So you're saying that you really do need to be using your skills and building projects you can show people, because that's kind of the whole point.
Absolutely. And I think that if you think of if you think of your portfolio, for designers here, the portfolio as your visual representation of your resume, it's the visual articulation of it. That portfolio needs to kind of have that same narrative arc, right? Am I growing? Am I doing these things? What's my point of view? What is the story I'm trying to tell here? And I found myself leaning more towards this enterprise pathway.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wanted to talk about that because we were talking off camera a little bit about this really big difference between, consumer facing and enterprise. And in the career hacking for programmers course, in researching it, I found that basically the enterprise space is where 75% of the economic activity in technology is. And it also implies a lot of different things about your approach.
Yeah, I mean, so when I think about the enterprise, there's two things. One, good advice I got early on in art school was don't go into sneaker design, go into healthcare design as an older person. And the idea was in healthcare, they will respect the gray hairs, right? They will look at your age, and they actually won't, even at 38 or so, I wasn't respected because I just looked too young, right? To know enough in that world. You're working with 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds who are evidence-based, and they need to see that you physically could have that evidence in you. And sneaker design is the opposite. They're going to judge you on your youth and how hip you are, and whether you're on the zeitgeist. And so enterprise UX is a very similar space, right? Where it is extrememely technical. It requires people who can get up on domain knowledge, but also kind of understand what is a good user experience.
Well, it also appears to me that you're used to working with these larger stakeholder groups a little bit. And I think as somebody who's mid-career, you have a little bit more time on the planet, get a little bit more patient. It appears to me maybe it's a more aligned space with what tends to happen to people after they get reach 35 or whatever. You have kids, you married, you understand compromise at a much deeper level.
Yeah. Well, and what it is it's finding the careers out there that respect that knowledge, right? That respect that experience. And again, go into sneaker design if you've been doing this for 20 years and manufacturing or something, and you feel like you can bring that to the table. But don't go into it thinking, well, hey, I like sneakers, right? And I want to design this thing, and people should just give me a shot because I'm a clever person. They're probably going to judge you, and they're probably going to look at you and just say, like, if you were so clever, you would have been doing this 20 years ago in your career. So I think when you're doing a retool like that, and let's say you are going to retool into the software world, things like enterprise do respect that domain knowledge. So, for example, if you're a machine shop operator and you've kind of maybe did 15 or 20 years really in the trenches on something, and you went back to school and you're thinking even business school, and you're thinking, all right, now I want to come back out, you could easily now work for a company that maybe is coming up with a automation process for the same work that you did for 15 years, right? You have deep knowledge of how to do it by hand. They're trying to automate that. You're extremely valuable to them, especially if you're bringing to them project management skills that you just learned in school, and you've kind of retooled yourself. That's the kind of, I think, ideal path.
Well, I think the enterprise space is interesting because I've worked one-on-one with a number of candidates, and a profile that I've seen often are candidates who are mid to mid-late career, technical experience, networking, app development. Maybe they've built modules to help the automation of maybe a proprietary system, manufacturing system. And for example, in the Midwest, a lot of manufacturing is going away, and oftentimes they have experience developing in languages like ASP.NET that just are not really used that much anymore. And so for them, it's not that they want to be an enterprise, but the type of enterprise that they were in is now gone. And there are other enterprises, maybe there are other enterprises that are more appropriate. For example, healthcare, education, like those they're not going to go away. I mean, what do you think about that? Do you see different sort of categories and cultures within enterprise, technology?
Yeah, I think what the hard part is when people try to do a one-to-one mapping of their experience, and they say, well, hey, I used to work at this company, and I want to go back to school. Now I want to come back to work for that particular company again, because somehow that company represented the thing that they're used to doing for 10 years prior, right? So let's assume you worked in agriculture, and you happen to, John Deere equipment was all around you, right? And you say, oh yeah, you know what? I'm tired of working in the field. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to get my MBA. I want to go work for John Deere because I used to see these things all the time. Then you get into there and you're like, wait, John Deere is a totally different company than they were when you were working in the field, right? Now they've completely shifted over. And in some cases, if you're a farmer today, you might look at John Deere with like a, a side eye and say, I don't want to use that machine because I can't fix it myself. And I think that kind of comes into play where people have to say, well, all right, well, what is the thing that you really enjoyed, right? When you were working in the field, what was the thing that the things about your job that you did like, that woke you up and got you to go do that? Now look at the landscape of people that are trying to either disrupt or maybe, innovate in that space. And what can you bring to them that's institutional knowledge that they can now move forward? A good company is a Flexport, right? It's a company that's innovating in the cargo exchange space, right? So they're making it so that it's a lot seamless to do this really time-consuming paper process across import-export around the world. I mean, that's the kind of job where someone I can easily see that they got laid off for because, there's this notion of, well, we don't have enough business to support it and something happens. You can then go to school, learn some project management skills, and then get a job at Flexport and say, well, hey, I have 15 years of clerical experience working in that exact domain space. I can tell you exactly why they're filling out that form in a particular way. Flexport will love that domain knowledge, and they want to use it because you're also bringing to them a project management skill or maybe a UX skill or development skill that basically says, I understand the domain and I can bring it to life.
So basically, how can you find the elements that are growing, that are even replacing the industries that are maybe gone? Yeah. So I know that we have to let you go here in a minute, Stephen. So do you have any sort of last words or of advice for folks that are going through something like this that we didn't talk about yet?
I would just say, keep your head straight. It is extremely nerve-wracking. It's emotionally it's emotionally taxing. There's nothing worse than being fired from a job. And if you truly are committed to retooling yourself and going down new paths, you will be fired from a job. You will take a job and you will either not be able to do that job. You won't understand the political traps that you'll step in, and the spring will sprung on you, and you're going to find yourself out. And you have to dust yourself off and say, all right, what's the next thing? I think if you get easily discouraged about that stuff, then even going down a whole retooling path is just going to be a failure for you. It's going to be a whole letdown. But if you can just say, you know what, everyone gets fired from a job. Everyone gets up in the morning and has a fight with someone. And sometimes you might send an email or say something and it's not recoverable. I mean, look at people like Roseanne Barr, Louis C.K. I mean, total career enders, right? How do they now recover from that? It doesn't excuse their behavior, horrible behavior, but at the same time, what we can learn from it is like, things happen, people say things, and you just got to kind of move forward from it and be able to say like, all right, what is the next thing that I can still use my skills towards? And that requires a lot of internal soul searching. You're going to rely on your friends, your family, perhaps. Mostly everyone's got friends that they can hopefully relate to and open up to. And then you just got to kind of keep checking yourself and saying like, is this where I need to be? Do I feel like I'm in this dark room? And there's furniture there. Do I feel comfortable, or do I need to leave and go to another room? No one's going to tell you when it's time to leave. And it's really going to be up to you to just have that presence to say, you know what, I need to be someplace else at this point. And if you can be true to yourself around that and have a good network and be nice to your coworkers, because they might be your boss in another job, which happened to me. Which is great because I was nice to Dave, and Dave's like, hey, great, we'll hire you. We liked working with you, right? Your personality goes for a lot of this, and you'll figure out the work along the way, and you do. And if you can do that, maintain that attitude, you're fine.
Well, I really appreciate your time, Stephen. And I want to just let people that are watching know that on Sunday, our Spirit Boost is going to be on automation, job insecurity, and well-being, and the connection of all those things. So very related topics.
Awesome.
So we're going to shut off the live stream. And thanks so much, Stephen. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks. Really appreciate it, Davis.